and welcome to the Healing Trauma Podcast, where we explore the healing power of creativity. I'm here with Jeffry Schmidt, Director of Communications for Heroic Resilience, and today we're discussing poetry and post-traumatic stress disorder. We're thrilled to introduce our guest, John Fox, founder of the Institute for Poetic Medicine. With over 4 decades in the field of poetry therapy, John has dedicated his life to demonstrating the profound connections between poetry and healing.
And John is a beacon of hope for countless people, and his work has touched thousands of lives, including those battling the scars of war-related post-traumatic stress disorder. His groundbreaking books, Finding What You Didn't Lose and Poetic Medicine, offer invaluable guidance and practical tools for showing how anyone can access the therapeutic possibilities of poem making. Through his leadership at the Institute for Poetic Medicine, John has trained gifted facilitators at healthcare facilities, schools, spiritual and community organizations, and has funded poetry partners who use poetry as a means of healing a wide range of life circumstances.
So join us as we dive into a conversation with John Fox about his journey, his insights on the healing power of poetry, and how we can all incorporate creativity into our lives for greater well-being. Whether you're a poet or finding that you would like to invite creativity into your life, or as someone simply curious about the role of art in healing, this episode promises to inspire and uplift. Please join us in welcoming John Fox, and thank you so much for being here.
Jain and Jeffrey, thank you so much for inviting me. I feel an honor and a gladness to be talking with you. Jain, I just felt very moved to learn of your book and to read from it, the Songs of My Heroes.
Yes, that was written about the soldiers that I saw in Germany. And some of the people I had seen in my practice as a psychotherapist, their words were incorporated into the poems that I wrote, and it was healing for me.
I'm sure, and that it provided a path of a creative path for hearing their words, along with your sort of, listening ear in a way that can help us to really feel what their experience is.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes they verbalize not clearly. They don't verbalize succinctly. It'll be broken up words, or their emotions spill over and they have to stop. And so writing it down and externalizing it for them really helped with healing for them.
Well, I think that kind of collaboration is like you're not changing what they're saying. You're sort of helping them to come forward with what they have said.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really feel that kind of collaboration is both creative and is a way for you as a psychologist, as someone who's there to hear them, can affirm for them that they in fact have been heard.
How did those two words, poetic and medicine, come into being for your experience? Where did your start in all of this come from?
Well, my start in all of this came from just falling in love with poetry from a very early age. I think I was 13 when I wrote my first poem, watching a girl skate at Thornton Park skating rink in Shaker Heights, Ohio. And I just remember standing outside of the skating rink with this notebook, and this girl, my age it seemed, skating alone on the ice, and in a little chocolate brown skating outfit. But I wanted my words. And this may sound like at 13 you were thinking this. Well, maybe not exactly, but I wanted my words to skate on the page. So there was something about the beauty of that affected me deeply and caught my attention, which I was never wavered. And then so that maybe is the poetic part. Although I don't like to sort of limit things because everything can be poetic. But then at the same time this was happening, I had a severe problem with my right leg that included many hospital stays and many surgeries. And writing became a way for me to give voice to that.
Yeah.
Because I didn't really have my parents to talk to. I mean, they were good people, but the poem allowed me to give more voice to what was my actual experience. So before I even knew that there was a field called poetic therapy, long before that, I was using poetry for my own benefit.
That's what I did. Yeah.
And so, and then way led on to way, and my leg became unrepairable by the time I was 18. So it was amputated.
I'm sorry.
And
that's traumatic.
Well, it was definitely traumatic. And there's so much that could be said about that, but on the path of living with a prosthetic leg and having that pretty severe loss, I met a man named Stephen Levine, who was doing work with people who were dying. And I had a death of losing my leg. And so when Steve and I met about 1981, we had a really good rapport, and I was learning from him. He was also a poet, so that was, a connection for us. And so I ended up managing some of his longer retreats.
Oh, for goodness.
In the early 80s. And so it was probably about 1983. This is kind of a little bit of a long story, and there's a lot I'm leaving out.
No, but we have time.
But in about 1983, I was sharing some poems because Stephen had invited me to share some poems, read some poems, speak some poems at some of his longer retreats. And this orthopedic surgeon came up to me, a man named Ken Zubrick. And the fact that he was an orthopedic surgeon, looking back, looks like it was sort of poetic justice.
Right.
Because he said, there's a woman you should meet who talks about poetry and healing like you do. Which may have been the first time that someone had sort of seen what I was doing and gave it a name. An identity. And so he said, this woman is Joy Sheeman, who was a pioneer in the field of poetry therapy, who worked at the hospital where he worked at El Camino Hospital in Mountain View, California. He said, you should get in contact with her.
I'll be darned. And you did.
And I did. It took there's a little more of the story, but it unfolded. And then by 1985, I was working with Joy as her intern. There was a nascent developed field in poetry therapy, and she invited me to work with her. So we led groups 2 days a week on the mental health wing at El Camino Hospital.
Oh, for goodness sakes.
And
I never heard about it until...
Well, a lot of people don't know.
No. But so we're spreading the word right now.
We're spreading the word. But that experience sort of got me tuned into this, now what I see as a calling, from even way back when I was 13, beginning to make poems. And then, like I say, there's a lot more to the story, but
when I look at your books and I look at how people have contributed to them and how profound some of these poems in here are, the work you have done, well, Jeffrey can tell you, I looked at these books and I thought, this is a doctoral thesis. This is incredible.
Well,
and the amount of work in them and the
Well-
depth of it.
Well, yes, but for our listeners and that I believe my goal is, and this is something we can talk about, is to make poetry and poem making, the writing of poems, accessible
Mhm.
to people who think, oh, that's special people who do that, or I hated poetry in high school, or I was wounded as a child because of being told that this isn't this couldn't be your poem because it's too good. I mean, there's all kinds of wounds, and so
Yeah.
so in writing these books, which are two different books, my intention was, how can this feel real, like Poetic Medicine? How can this feel really like these are people who have had to use poems because they've gone through all
Mhm.
kinds of things,
Yeah. And
just living a life.
Yeah, and they're just daily living, the things that we all go through.
Right.
There are so many things that I was thinking the other day, women going through childbirth, the
Yeah.
whole pregnancy experience and the birth can be wonderful and at the same time frightening and mishandled by the medical community or
Haven't we been hearing about that lately?
certainly have. Way too much.
Yeah.
And too many people letting other women suffer. But I think I've seen men in war. I've seen women in domestic violence situations.
Yes.
I've seen kids displaced, abandoned, and
Huh.
poetry would be something that all of them could use.
Well, I certainly agree with you,
Mhm.
and there's a way where, when I say making the poetry accessible, that's because of this faith I have that each of us has a creativity is integral to each of us as a human being, and it just gets tamped down or
Yes.
disregarded or not or ignored.
Can I tell you a story?
Sure can.
But I was teaching teachers,
Yes.
and we were looking at building self-esteem in the classroom.
Uh-huh.
And I had them take a card, and on one side they wrote what a teacher did to build your self-esteem, and on the other side,
Oh.
what a teacher did to break down your self-esteem.
Mm.
And one of them was, she never drew again. She drew a picture of Santa. Her teacher came by, looked at it, and said,
Oh no.
"Oh, it's too skinny." And she said she never drew Santa again. So, I mean, it's a delicate moment when
That's
you're creating.
It's a delicate moment. It's a sacred moment. It's a moment that should be welcomed. Like that story you just said. There's a wonderful poet named Naomi Shihab Nye,
Mm.
who Palestinian American poet, but she wrote a poem called "How to Paint a Donkey." You can look it up.
Oh, I will.
And that poem is that story you just said about the woman saying, what did she say to that child?
Your Santa is too skinny.
Well, she's a teacher said a similar thing to Naomi, and she made her crumple it up and throw it in the trash.
Oh.
So that's the raw, rough part. But then a little late in the poem, her lines are how Naomi reclaimed that she had painted the donkey in just the right way.
Good.
Good. It's like,
Yes.
but this is like the poem allowed her to write those words down on the page. The donkey was just right. So, yeah, I mean, I feel that creativity being integral to each person,
Mm-hmm.
is what these books are
They're wonderful.
intend to be about. And go ahead.
I should read one.
Okay. Okay, yeah. So
I call that creativity a fire in me.
excellent.
And
See,
when it starts, I can't stop it.
well, yeah, and a fire. See that's an image.
Yeah.
The wonderful poet Rainer Maria Rilke
Oh, yes.
said, "You must give birth to your images.
Mm.
They are the future waiting to be born."
Oh, wow. I like that. Yeah.
I like that too. So your fire,
Oh, yeah.
you could. So you asked me to read a poem. So
Which book?
this is from Finding What You Didn't Lose.
Okay.
And
I love that title.
one of the core things that I feel makes poetry healing is the experience of surprise.
Mm-hmm.
When someone writes something down on the page and it's just fresh, and they said, I had no idea I thought that way.
Mm-hmm.
Or, so I'm going to read a poem that speaks about the writer of it just finding surprise, a surprise that was so satisfying.
Mm. But hidden, maybe.
But absolutely hidden.
Yeah.
So the poet is a woman named Connie Smith Siegel. She's a wonderful, has passed, a dear friend, but a wonderful landscape painter.
Mm.
But the poem shows that she's a painter. It's called Rio Chama. She was driving along the Rio Chama riverbed, but a rainstorm stopped her in her tracks.
Oh.
And made a road impassable. Okay. So she got out and just sat, and this poem came to her. This poem arrived. Rio Chama, half moon rising out of purple twilight, shining on the rocks and distant cliffs, black, blue, swallows, rosy glow, and stars appear. I hear the sound of water on the banks of Rio Chama on a clear August night. I am enthralled with Rio Chama. Along the rutted road, I saw the gray-green water edged by bright green willows, part the orange cliffs above and stretching far beyond, keeping their distance, yet present in their light. There's a shift here. Are you the river place I always search for? The one that nurtures me and strengthens both? If only the road were shorter, smoother, or less impassable with rain. A little more comfortable, predictable. Then I would take you to my heart, be loyal all year round.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yet now I sleep beside you, river. Your sound comes in, the distance gone. The echo of your voice is in me, river. A sound of searching, wanting to be home. A place, a person. What in this whole earth can hold me? Take my heart, wake my soul. Or do I keep on traveling like the river, arriving home, but always moving on? A sound of searching, wanting to be home, a place, a person. What in this whole earth can hold me? Take my heart, wake my soul. Or do I keep on traveling like the river, arriving home, but always moving on? Connie further describes her experience of writing this poem. The last stanza was a total surprise.
Oh.
The one that begins, now I sleep beside you, river.
Right.
The last stanza was a total surprise. I had started to talk to the river in poetry. Once the river metaphor jumped in, the rhythm and cadence seemed to pull me like a magnet. Things, insights, and feelings rushed over and stuck to it. I chewed on those last two lines all day long. Or do I keep on traveling like the river, arriving home but always moving on?
Huh.
I chewed on those last two lines all day long. It was such a joy. The making of language took me to a whole new place, a place that was deeply integrated and alive.
Don't you love the fact that she feels the rhythm, and there's rhythm in the water flowing by,
and she's resonating.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful.
So that sense of she wrote the poem, and it's very painterly. You can read it up,
Yeah.
but then the last stanza, and it's sort of
Yeah.
midway, it goes through this shift where she begins to do
Am
this
I gonna just
self-reflection,
Yeah.
and then so
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you.
yeah, thank you.
Well,
Thanks to Connie
these books are filled with poems and
and stories.
yeah, and they're amazing. Did you get to read any of them?
No.
Oh, well, look at this. I don't believe in tame poetry.
Oh,
All these words
Oh.
that somebody wrote down. Oh my gosh.
see that's like, it's a little bit like the story you told me,
Yeah.
and so that's where what Jane is looking at is this page with all these words which you can make a copy of and cut out and put on little pieces of cardstock
Yes.
because they can
Yes, and
and then
random.
arrange them.
Look at that. And more if they want to include their own.
Oh, that's absolutely true.
Yeah.
If you want to include your own words or change them, like I worked a lot with children, and
Oh, okay.
and so I had a word bowl like that was a lot with hundreds of words, hundreds and hundreds of words, and one of the words was the composer Bach.
Uh-huh.
Do you like Bach?
Sort of.
I-
Some things by Bach I do.
Well, that's not the point, because at one point with a group of fifth graders, the word Bach came back with an E
Oh.
in jam between the B and the A.
Oh, okay.
If you put an E between the B and the A, what does that word become?
Beach.
Beach.
Yeah.
So it's much more,
Oh, yeah.
that's a better word for some poem somewhere.
I should say.
And so that leans into this idea of playfulness,
Yes.
and that we as adults, I don't know if everybody's listening to this as an adult, but we lose touch with our
Right.
That's why working with children for so much in my early practice taught me so much about working with adults, because what I really want to do is get them to loosen up a little bit and feel like they could mess around with words and play a little bit more. So
Once I was it was night, and I had been to a doctor's appointment, which is kind of serious. Here you get into your grown-up part, and I was leaving to go home, and I came to a stop sign. There was no one going anywhere, but I was a good girl and I stopped. No one was coming from the right or left or toward me or anything.
for a long time.
I sat there until the light changed, and then I drove on. But I thought afterwards, I know why I play, because there are no stop signs or go signs
What
or fast signs or slow signs that I can just play. And that came to me just driving around the corner, and I had sat there and waited for that silly light to change from training. But then the part of me that said, I know why I play.
Well, wonderful paying attention to your experience and learning from it and seeing how it this could be different.
Yeah. I could have just driven on, but then I would have broken the rules, and so I have to look at that part too. Like what holds me back from doing something
So
safe?
how can we put ourselves in a situation where there are no lights, are no stop signs or street lights, or not street lights?
Go
Stop.
on stop signs?
Yeah.
How can we put ourselves there? You mean internally?
Yeah, like
We have to let go. We have to let go.
Well, you showed before those words on a page. Like
Yeah.
there's no rules. A poem doesn't have to
Right.
rhyme. It can rhyme, but it doesn't have to be a certain way. And you can sort of mess around.
Yeah, and you can break the rules
You
that
can
everybody gives you.
Yeah, you don't even have to learn the rules.
Oh, I like that. You don't even have to learn the rules. Did you write poetry?
I wrote poetry after that one incident where I had that small little bit of PTSD, and you helped me do your little process
Okay.
of just writing down words, and I put on different colored paper, the kind of positive stuff on one color, the negative stuff on another, and it was very revelatory. It was just this wonderful process, and to go back to where we were at in the conversation, where the little girl drew a Santa,
Yeah.
and the convention of Santa is not to be skinny, but she drew a skinny Santa.
Hurrah!
So what a constraint it is to have a Santa just to be always a certain way, or having to be anything all a certain way. And poetry is allowing us to step outside
Yeah.
of whatever
Yes.
social constraint, whatever learned constraint,
Yeah.
whatever thing that came in from the outside, and allow us to connect with what
Your own unique.
Santa.
our own unique experience of the world.
Right.
So when you got the idea that poetry was truly medicinal, medical, healing, what was that moment like? What was it a moment, or was it a more gradual thing?
Did someone see that in you, that you could be a healer?
No. I think what I'd like to share is a poem I wrote when I was 19, and my leg had been amputated, and I was dealing with that, and I was also dealing with being alone at Boston University in my sophomore year, and I got a little contusion on the end of my stump, which I couldn't use my prosthetic leg. So I was faced with having to go out into the world to my classes, walking on Commonwealth Avenue without a leg. And I found myself terrified by that and feeling terribly isolated. And I know there was shame involved. So I was faced with all this, and for a couple days I holed up in my dormitory room. And I had a wonderful counselor at that point, a man named John Lambden. But it was still up to me to have to go on crutches and go out. And it was during this time that I wrote this poem I'm going to share with you. That I think your question asked me, when did I really consciously become aware of this? But this poem, I think, was my way of experiencing poetry as a medicine, poetry as a healing art, just in the midst of my life.
Goodness gracious.
So this poem, I call this poem Even to This. And you can't see it, the listeners can't see it, but the top part of the poem, words are scattered on the page, and I'll tell you why they're scattered after I read the poem. What my thoughts, the poem is called Even to This. What my thoughts have troubled about all through the night after night. It's so very scary. Sometimes I feel, would rather, what's the worst that could happen? Because it just hurts too much, or having had enough of my own self-hatred against myself, lonely is nowhere else to go. Nowhere else to go. Time to stop feeling sorry for myself. Time to open my heart, even to this, and call to God. With this poem, I gathered just enough courage to go out. Writing this poem helped me to do that, and the words splayed at the top are because during this time I sometimes had trouble completing a sentence. I would never tell anybody, at least now I certainly wouldn't tell anybody, stop feeling sorry. If you stop feeling sorry for yourself, that would be a good thing to do. But I could say it to myself. I could say it to myself. And it's so profoundly true that I was at that time crying, I say calling out to God. And so, but the poem was a direct expression of this, treating the poem like a medicine. When I wrote, two stories I'll share. When I wrote Poetic Medicine, I found three metaphors to describe its healing nature.
Mm-hmm.
And this happens early in the book. But the first thing was that the poem becomes a sacred place. And I'm very comfortable using that word sacred. It becomes it's your own life. So that was one. And then the second one was the poem can be a companion. That poem I just shared with you has been a companion during my life. Because it's not like it just was that time when I had to be open to even to this. There's been a number of times when I had an even to this moment. Mm-hmm. But then the third metaphor that I attribute to poetry is it as a medicine. Mm-hmm. That if we can treat it without sort of literary critique or judgment or harsh, harshness, that we lean into it and feel it and welcome it, it can actually, and a wonderful guy named James Pennebaker has done research into expressive writing. People can look it up, and it's not poetry exactly, but if you write with expressive feeling on the page, that can actually increase T cell count.
Oh, really?
And I know, I see your eyes, Jeffrey. You're kind of going, really? And yes, he really shows it. And it involved having less visits to the infirmary for these students he was working with. So the idea of words and having a medicinal or a kind of medicine that you can absorb, I think has been central to my experience.
Yes, mine too.
And yours too.
Yes, absolutely. I was my doctor and I was my patient all at once. And if I could put something down on paper when I came home from a day listening to soldiers' stories,
Mhm.
if I could do that and I could make sense out of it
Yeah.
and I could externalize it
Yes.
and
So-
put it there, I could change it.
See that gesture you make, Jane, of going like this.
Mhm.
So you're actually touching the surface of where those words are, but there's not it's not vague and far away. It's like
no.
right here,
Right here.
but you can look at it,
Yep.
and
Yeah.
and that allows you to have a little bit of space. Like writing in my poem, even to this, made me say, well, I can look at that, and that space gives me a little bit of room to breathe.
Yeah, and it wasn't all of you.
Wasn't all right.
That's hardly all of you. And that the poems that I was writing about my own experience, like I'm at war today. It came into my room, in my little room. Here I am with this soldier, and he's telling me what war is to him.
So,
and it could wear me down. But when I externalize it and put it on paper, it allows me to see what I'm going through, first of all, and ask for the help. Like you said, God, you have to reach out for God. And I had to reach out for friends and support and understanding what I was going through. Why am I cranky?
yeah. Well, and getting, so this brings up actually a really beautiful aspect of this. We're talking about working with individuals who might have post-traumatic stress disorder or have grieving the loss of a loved one. But you, as a person helping, you also need some way of not having to carry it around.
Right.
And so that writing of the poem is I see it as an act of self-care.
Yes.
Do you agree with that?
I agree.
And so in working with a lot of professional people, hospice chaplains, medical students, physicians, nurses. They so often their burdens are great, and their concerns, are deep, and yet they too need this. I'm going to call it a modality, but it's really
Yes, it is a modality.
this modality of poetry is a way to provide themselves with self-care.
Yes, absolutely. Could I read
Sure.
no,
Of course you can.
my little book over there?
Yeah.
I'm going to read the second Meeting War, because the first one of Meeting War was like, hello,
Uh-huh.
I'm
Well,
surprised.
this is important. The first one was what? Like,
It was about meeting war.
so
It can't. Do you want me to read that one?
yeah,
Okay, let's see.
because this is
One.
where I want Jane to appreciate that it was not just toss these poems into pages. She thought about how to bring this to introduce me to it.
Well, I'll introduce you to my experience, okay? I met war today. It was waiting for me in my office, sitting slyly on the forehead of a very young soldier, 16 when he lied to get into the army. War pulled on his eyebrows and tugged on his jaw to make his face sag. War poked the boy's eyes to make him cry when he didn't want to, watched me cringe at reality when horror stories followed on and on. War laughed at me for being naive to think that life was holy and meaningful. It smirked and it scoffed, then snuggled down deep into the darkest parts of both of us.
Oh, so hearing that poem, and I shouldn't respond so quickly. I let it sort of have some space.
Oh,
But read the last 3 lines to me of
wait a minute.
that poem.
Where was I? The last 3 lines.
3 or 4.
Okay, 3. War laughed at me for being naive to think that life was holy and meaningful. It smirked and scoffed and then snuggled down deep into the darkest parts of both of us.
So there's empathy in those lines. Do you agree that,
Yeah.
and so often we don't give ourselves too much credit for the real positive things, but to have empathy. You couldn't make that book without empathy.
True.
And
True.
and so that's,
Yeah.
but also one of my favorite poems that I use in my practice of poetic medicine is a very short poem by a poet named Charles Olson. And the poem is called, it's just like, I think it's 28 words.
Mm.
It's called These Days. So consider those last 4 lines. Whatever you have to say, leave the roots on. Let them dangle in the dirt, just to make clear where they come from. Whatever you have to say, leave the roots on. Let them dangle in the dirt, just to make clear where they come from. When you read that poem, and the last 4 lines in particular, that poem about leaving the roots on and the dirt. And so very often with whatever group I'm with, but say with people living with cancer or with Parkinson's or with, I'll say, like, I can ask you, both of you, like, what does that say to you? Whatever you have to say, leave the roots on.
The basics. Don't close it off as though it's a finished thing.
Oh,
That's what it means to me. Somehow.
What do you have to say? Leave the roots on. Let them dangle in the dirt. Well, Jeffrey, what is that for you?
It just evoked the kernel
Ooh,
of what the idea is that's being imparted.
See, that poem, 28 words, I've shared it for decades. And And it always brings forward new ways. Like no one has ever said the word kernel, and no one ever has said that. Because my memory is getting a little slippery in some ways, but it remembers what people say about poems. And it's so rich that a poem of so few words
Yeah.
can evoke so much. And of course, people say something similar. But the reason I brought that poem up mainly is just appreciating you for leaving the roots on.
Oh,
and
thank you.
and not for cleaning it up, not for making it, nice. Exactly.
Let me read the second one that goes with it, may I?
Yeah, please.
This is Meeting War number 2, Burnout.
Uh-huh.
It's still there, smart and smug, the bundle of experiences, fire, blood, and fears, smoke, shock, rage, and tears, strangling the work of healing. Where are the doors to his soul? Where are the windows? Where is the fissure, the small cleft that will let me in? I see him going. He's going far away inside his mind, and my reach is too short. My grasp is too weak. My words are too thin to hold him. Help me here. I need backup. I need backup now.
Ooh.
Yeah. And whoa, that's how I felt. I just had run out of ideas and was at the end of myself when I wrote that down because I couldn't find a way to help him. So
How did writing the poem, did it help you?
I admitted I need help.
Oh.
At the end of it, I was my words were too thin to hold him. I felt like all my tools were not enough. Everything,
So
all my training, everything wasn't enough because I was afraid I was going to lose him. And I was yelling inside myself in silence, help me here. And it was to the world, I need backup. I need backup now,
Uh-huh.
And I didn't have it. So the roots are all there and the dirt is too.
The dirt. And as a poetry therapist, like one of my, not as a poetry therapist, just a person, one of my first responses want to say, well, Jain, you had those wonderful words like cleft, and you had all that, so, but that's me trying to fix you.
That's all right.
Well, no, it's really not quite all right.
That's where I'm help. I'm yelling for help.
Well, but I feel you were getting to the bone.
Yeah, this is to the bone.
That's to the bone. And so and here you are right now. So what I want to say is we can get to the bone. And
feeling inadequate, feeling not enough, someone essentially dying in front of me. You've been there with hospice.
Yeah.
This was his choice maybe to die, not be here anymore. And I didn't have the words to catch him, to hold him.
At that time.
Yeah, at that time. Yeah.
That's an important phrase, isn't it? At that time.
Yeah.
Do you feel that helped you become a better therapist?
Yes.
To be willing to say, I don't know what to do.
Absolutely.
I don't know.
I don't know it all. I don't know all the techniques and there's got to be another one.
So the poem, you kind of, you had to write the poem to get there. Is that true?
Yes, that is true. Because sometimes you come home and you go, well, it's just another day and I've got to put it away, but it's not. You carry this stuff. Our experiences, I think, we carry them on day after day after day. It doesn't matter how long.
It doesn't matter how long.
No.
But finding your own creative way of putting it. I'd like to share something that kind of goes the other direction.
Okay.
Where someone is down at the bone and the poem helps them come back up to feel the marrow bone creating blood. And so I'm going to share a poem. And I want to say that the poem I read of Connie and this poem, I have permission.
good. Okay.
These poems are in the book Poetic Medicine. And one of the things the permission says is you can share this in other ways. So, many years ago, there was a man named Bill. I've got let's see. 3. Oh, yeah. So I'm going to read. This is from the book, but I think this is illuminating for us right now because it shows him coming back towards life. So Bill Stephenson is a North Carolina writer. May he be okay in North Carolina these days.
Oh my, yes.
And former professor. Bill was surprised to see how my suggestion to concentrate on something personally important to him, something he considered a sacred object, could suddenly bring a poem into being. The object Bill chose was a little square black box, a keepsake remembrance from his wife who had died. Bill says, the poem just hit me. There you go. The poem just hit me as I walked from my cabin to the place where our writing workshop was meeting. He wasn't sitting at a desk and sort of, trying to... the poem came to him. The poem is called Square Black Box. Square black box, tiny, lidded, empty, longtime companion, hard-edged in my pocket, a gift remaining to me, though my wife who has died, who was its giver. So long a companion the lid has scratched dim. Hear me, relic and reliquary, holder of her memory even now. Become my sacred vessel too. Become my sacred vessel too. Hold my inner emptiness in yours, and from your darkness, bring me expanding vision. That emptiness is truly infinite space. That emptiness is truly infinite space, where all things are possible, where scratched and faded flowers blossom bright again, and where lost love is to be found again, and held in a grasp as safe and close as my fingers have as my fingers have when they hold tight to your four corners. Bill says, after 21 years of marriage, my wife developed an illness that was sudden, severe, mysterious to doctors, and ultimately unstoppable. Her death left me in a devastation of loss and denial. But 7 years later, 7 years later, in writing this poem, I realized suddenly that the black box I'd kept with me so long was a small, tangible means of summoning up the intangible. Looking into its dark interior was looking into the darkness of losing her and finding how much I had not lost. The memories that time had dimmed were suddenly vivid again, just as imagination brought back the original colors of the flowers on the box lid. Memories of happy times, of love, came flooding back from depths I had thought to contain only pain and regret. The poem flowed onto my notebook page, naturally and unstoppably, from this gift of realization.
That's lovely. That's wonderful.
I noticed so much because early in the first sentence he says, my wife developed an illness that was sudden, severe, mysterious to doctors, and ultimately unstoppable. And this is what he said to me about the poem. But then the last line of what he said, or the last sentence, the poem flowed onto my notebook page naturally and unstoppably.
And unstoppable and unstoppably.
From this gift of realization. So thank you, Bill.
Yes, thank you, Bill. That's so open and
And
raw.
it's and then he does another word that I think is important for poetry as a healing modality, as a healer. He used the words, the memories that dimmed had were suddenly vivid again, just as imagination brought back the original colors of the flowers on the box lid.
Say that again.
So he says, the memories that had dimmed were suddenly vivid again.
Yeah.
Just as imagination brought back the original colors of the flowers on the box lid.
Have you ever had that happen, though, as you're writing poetry? Other memories of similar things come flooding back?
Oh, for sure.
Vivid?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I like that. That it opens up a lot of things.
It's opened up a lot of things, and we've talked a number of times in this conversation about, like, that, you were talking about someone, just something opened up for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm totally amazed that, because I thought going to see the Army guys in 2006 when I was over in Germany, I thought that was the beginning of my journey. It wasn't. It goes way back further than that.
Well, tell me about that, because that's my journey too. Is trying to go out on Commonwealth Avenue with on crutches.
I didn't have anything traumatic as that, but
Well,
no, but it was just I was born at a time when I thought that my life was just placid, but right at 4, all of a sudden World War II started and everything changed. We went in, remember when we went into the store and there was no toilet paper at the beginning of COVID? Yeah. Well, that's the way it was at the beginning of World War II. We heard over the back fence, my neighbor said, Japan just bombed Pearl Harbor. And the next day, my mother, my grandmother, and I went down to the supermarket. It wasn't a supermarket, it was a grocery store. It was empty. Everything was gone, except maybe some fruits, fresh fruits.
wow.
Everything was gone. People.
And you remember that?
Oh,
Wherefore?
because my grandmother burst into tears.
So I want people to just consider the look on Jane's face, because a few moments ago she said, "Well, it wasn't that dramatic, but it sounded to me like for you,
Oh, yes.
it was like
My grandmother crying
right
in the middle of the store that
And
was
so-
empty.
So your connection with war
Yeah.
was really initiated in that moment.
Yeah. Yes. Over the back fence. And my mother started to
Step over the back fence.
Yes. My mother was hanging up the laundry.
Oh my!
And the neighbor leaned over and said they bombed Pearl Harbor. And her son was going down to enlist the next day. And my mother started to shake because her husband, her brother, all of her friends would be going down too. They were kids. They were young.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And I was on the swing going, what the heck? What's going on? And so I realized that.
You were observing it,
Oh, yeah.
but you were also feeling it.
Oh, yes. And the day went from warm to icy cold.
Oh boy!
Yeah. And
What a vivid experience.
yes, it was. And all through the war, there were things like that. And they showed the newsreel to the little kids. That was the grown-up newsreel. And you went down on Saturday morning, you paid 25 cents to see
So the
movies.
U.S. Arizona being bombed.
Everything. The bodies coming out of Dachau. Everything. And I'm sitting there like, freaking out.
So you grew up in the midst of war.
Yes, I did.
I mean, as a child.
Yes, and everybody leaning into the radio because there was no TV,
Right.
no internet, listening and reading the news.
But in a way, there was more intimacy because there wasn't such a plethora of so much,
Right.
So there's a radio and a newspaper and your relationships.
Yep. Yes. And so it was powerful.
Yeah.
And I thought everything started when I was over in Germany. No, no, no. My sensitivity, my being raw about this started while I was a little girl. And it trains you when you're a child. That's why I think it's so important to get these kids that are being abused or neglected or something, to get them help.
Right. And the Institute for Poetic Medicine, just to be sort of, we're very aware of immigrant or refugee youth, and
Yes.
very aware of people with Parkinson's, very aware of people doing substance use, the unhoused, of
Yes.
people with mental health diagnosis. And we have a wonderful program that's kind of rooted in Texas, but it's called Poetry as a Tool for Wellness. And what we've been doing, this sounds like I'm sort of jumping here, but
Oh, yeah.
is training peer facilitators. And so that means people who have themselves have a mental health diagnosis. We're training people to be facilitators of this practice, this poetry and healing method of poetry as a tool for wellness.
Oh,
And
that's great.
so that brings meaning. It brings, like, you just don't have a mental health diagnosis. You have a gift to help others to hear themselves, just like you're hearing yourself. So it sort of levels the playing field. So we have a program called Poetry as a Tool for Wellness, and it is facilitated by people who have come into the program with mental health diagnosis, but they are so excellent at helping others to find their creative spark and begin to write. And so, but that's one of the programs we have. I have a 3-year, the Institute has a 3-year training program
Oh,
that
my.
really gives people a deep foundation for bringing the practice of poetic medicine or poetry therapy to life. And people working across a broad range of human need.
Oh.
So if people are interested in finding out more,
Mhm.
and I hope people will be, I mean, they certainly could check out my books. One of the questions
Yeah.
was, how can people make access to this? And I say, well, my books have a lot of exercises and stories,
Mhm.
but they can also find out more of what's going on with the Institute by writing to info@poeticmedicine.org.
Okay.
Info
Info at Poetic. We'll
medicine.
put that up on the screen.
They can put that up on the screen. And then, we have a monthly, we don't send out a lot of things, but if people are interested in hearing from us, we send out a very rich monthly newsletter.
Okay.
So can I, you remember how I told you, what was the first poem I ever wrote?
Yes. That little ice skater in the
Right.
Kept of you remote.
Right. So I don't have that poem, of course, or at least I don't. And so, but years and years and years later, I thought of that. And so I wrote this poem. It's called Poetry.
Mm.
And so I'd like to say it.
Yes.
Let's see if I can remember it.
Okay.
She skates boldly onto the page, tips one vulnerable foot back and forth slowly, till finally the edge of a toe cuts a simple sharp line through the world's cold resistance. And with that plain courage, a statement of intention begins, and you can't turn back any longer from the weight of feeling and letting go into the flow that follows. Poetry is a choice to feel it all, not all at once, but gradually to sink down within ourselves, to give what fear we hold behind our knees to gravity and grace, to discover what makes our whole world turn, to place our necessary weight, lift to lightened joy. That was
Oh my gosh.
We were talking before about poetry as healing, but poetry going beyond the healing and bringing joy and
yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure.
and all these wonderful positive emotions into our lives.
Yeah.
I want to thank you for being here today. It has just been a joy. You are a treasure, a national treasure. John, thank you for being here and for accepting our invitation. And it was illuminating. Oh my gosh, I just learned so much just listening to you.
It was a pleasure
Oh, good.
and fun, and also wonderful to touch into some deep places
Yes.
together.
Mhm.
And I can't wish you enough goodness and for doing Agency for Earth, for doing this work with vets. We know how vets are struggling these days, and that's an understatement.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. And thank you for joining us and listening to our conversation about post-traumatic stress disorder. Please join us again when we bring another podcast of Healing Trauma Podcasts. Bye-bye.
Healing Trauma is a production of Heroic Resilience. Executive producer Dr. Jain Fairfax. Produced and directed by Alejandro R. Torres. Director of Communications Jeffry Schmidt. Created by Dr. Jain Fairfax. Copyright 2025. Visit heroicresilience.com to learn more about this podcast and our mission of creating a more trauma-resilient society. Join us right here next time or wherever you get your podcasts as Dr. Jain takes a deeper dive into the many ways people are working to actually heal trauma and PTSD.